In this video, we're going to talk about rates. We are going to talk about rates. And in math, a rate is just a way to compare two different kinds of things. So, for example, we may look at how many miles we travel after driving for 1 hour and see that we traveled 40 miles. We traveled 40 miles. And since we traveled this distance within exactly 1 hour, we can write this as 40 miles per hour. Per hour. And you will probably see this written as MPH. That stands for miles per hour. And then we can look at another example of a rate real quick. So we might say that we could say that there are 160 calories 160 calories per serving of chips. Per serving of chips. And this rate is just going to tell us how many, like it says, how many calories there will be in one serving of chips. So you can imagine that if there were more servings, then the calories would also increase. We can look at just one more. We could say that your car travels 4 miles per gallon of gas. Per gallon of gas. So if you wanted to know how many miles could travel if you had maybe more gallons of gas, you could just solve that, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So but before we do that, another way that you can write rates is as a fraction. Okay, so the way it's commonly written, so we can take this first example, it would be 40 miles, and then there would be a division bar or a fraction bar. 40 miles and then hour. And then this division bar is just read as per. So this would be 40 miles an hour, and we can rewrite this one. So it would be 160 calories per one serving. And we don't have to write the one, it's implied, because if we were dividing by one, it would just be the value on top. So we just write it as serving. And notice that the number outside the fraction, this is implied multiplication. So we could write a multiplication here. The number would be on top, because all that fractions mean is that you're multiplying by the numerator and then dividing by the denominator. And since the denominator is 1, that doesn't necessarily matter. And then we can rewrite this last one. And we can rewrite it on top. So we can write 4 miles. And there's an implied gallon here. So we could just write 4 miles and then gallon, or we could write it 1 gallon. And I'll go ahead and do that. And this may seem a little bit familiar with a concept you may already know, and that is a ratio. So you'd be correct. We can rewrite all rates as a ratio, and then we can rewrite all ratios as a rate. So, for example, we have 40 miles per hour. We can rewrite that as a ratio. And let me just kind of divide this so it's a little bit easier to see. So we can write 40 miles and then write a colon as the ratio notation. 40 miles per 1 hour. 40 miles per 1 hour. And we can do the same thing down here. We have 160 calories. 160 calories per one serving. And then down here, 4 miles per 1 gallon. Per 1 gallon. And you may have noticed that ratios are actually really helpful tools in real life. They can help us compare things, like how fast we're going, or how much things cost or how much of a specific ingredient we may need in a recipe. So you'll find that rates are not only just everywhere in math, but they are also just used commonly in real life. So you'll find that you're using them a lot in and outside of math. So to help conceptualize rates, let's look at some examples. Say we are going to a grocery store and in the produce aisle we see a sign that says 75 cents or $0.75 per per 1 pound of grapes. 1 pound of grapes. And we can rewrite this as, all the other ways. We could just write this as a fraction, which we can go ahead and do. So we can write 0.75 0.75 per one. Let's work out 2 per 1 pound of grapes. And the 1 is implied. We didn't necessarily need to write the 1 here. It could just be pounds of grapes. But so this is all we necessarily need to know. It tells us how much money it will cost if you want to buy a specific amount of grapes, or if we want to buy a specific amount of grapes, how much money that's going to cost. And we can do a little work to figure out some things with that. So let's say we're going to this grocery store and we want to buy 2 pounds of grapes specifically. So what we need to do is multiply both the numerator and denominator of this rate by 2, since multiplying by 2, or let me just let me write this and then you can kind of see what's going on. And then we can write times 2 over 2. And notice that when a fraction has the numerator and denominator of equivalent value, that's going to be 1. So this is the same thing as multiplying by 1 here. And multiplying by 1 will not change the value of the fraction. So we can multiply the numerator and denominators both by 2, since that's how we multiply fractions. So this will be, so 1 pound of grapes times 2 will just be 2 pounds of grapes. Pounds of grapes. And then 0.75 times 2 will be 1.5, but we can, go ahead and do that multiplication just to make sure it checks out. 0.75 0.75 multiplied by 2. So 5 times 2 is 10, so we carry the 1. And then 7 times 2 is 14, plus that 1 is 5. And then you can notice here that we have 2 numbers to the right of the decimal place. So we're going to have 2 numbers to the right of the decimal place here. So that leaves us with 1.5. But since we're talking in money, that's going to be $1.50. $1.50. And we could have rewritten that as, ratio notation. So we could have said, write the money here so you know what we're talking about, per 1 pound. Per 1 pound. And then we could have done the same thing and multiplied by 2. We could have multiplied this by 2. Could have multiplied that by 2. And that would have gotten us to, of course, $1.50 to 2 pounds. 2 pounds. So if we were to buy 2 pounds of grapes, we know that it would cost $1.50. And you can keep going with this. Say you wanted 5 pounds, you would just multiply both by 5. Or let's say you had $3 to spend, you could multiply 0.75 to what you need to get to 3. So you would actually end up dividing 3 by 0.75, and then you would multiply the quotient by each of these, and then we would figure out exactly how many pounds we could buy per based on how much money we have to buy the grapes. Let's do one more example here. So after a road trip, we are told that we traveled 100 miles over 2 miles. So we drove for 2 miles, or sorry, I said that backwards. We drove 100 miles in 2 hours. So I could write per 2 hours. And we could write this as ratios and fractions, but we will rewrite this as a ratio. So we can say 100 miles and then for every 2 hours. And this just tells us after driving 2 hours, we will travel 100 miles. And if we traveled 100 miles, it would have taken us 2 hours. So let's find our rate in miles per hour or miles per 1 hour. So to get to 2 hours from one, or to get from 2 hours to 1 hours or 1 hour, we will just multiply, or we will divide rather by two, because two divided by two is one. And then we will have to do the same thing. So this one we will divide by 2. And then, of course, 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So we can write hour. And we can write a 1 here, but we didn't need to. And then we can write 100 here. Well, that's divided by 2. So that would be 50 miles. 50 miles. And we can rewrite this as, we were saying it as a rate. So it would be, so this would be 50. So it would be 50 miles per hour, or mph. And we can also write it as 50 miles per, remember this division bar is read as per hour. So if we were wanting to know the unit rate or how many miles we traveled in 1 hour, this is our answer: 50 miles per hour.